When we're learning to find our way using trees, we are thinking about the effects of the sun, the wind, and water. And when you're just setting out, the best thing to do is find a nice big, isolated deciduous tree. The reason we want an isolated deciduous tree is because a tree that's standing on its own is exposed to all of those elements. The sun, the wind, and the water will have their effects on it. When we go into a woodland, we need to use slightly different techniques. So at the start, seek out that isolated deciduous tree. That's what I'm going to do now. What we've got here is an excellent example of an isolated deciduous tree. In this case, it's an ash tree, but the species doesn't matter. It's the broad leaves and the fact it's an isolated tree that is important. And what you'll notice straight away is that it's not symmetrical. There is much more tree on the left-hand side as you look at it. And what we do is we just bolt two quite simple pieces together. We know the sun is due south in the middle of the day. That is when it gives us most of its light and energy. Green plants need that energy. It's their breakfast, lunch and dinner. So what we find is green plants grow bigger on their southern side. In this case, the tree is much bigger on the left side. It's telling us south is out this way. Having noticed that there are more branches and more tree on the south side where it's getting most of the light, the next thing to look for is something I call the tick effect. The branches grow towards the light. So what we find is on the south side of the tree, they grow out towards the southern sky, giving them a horizontal angle. On the north side of the tree, they're not getting any direct light from the south because the branches on the south shade that side of the tree. So most of the light comes from high up, the sky above the tree, and that leads to branches growing at closer to a vertical angle. So what we find on isolated deciduous trees is more branches on the southern side growing close to horizontal, fewer branches on the north side growing closer to vertical, and the two things together give us a shape I think of as the tick effect. Sunlight affects every growing part of a tree. We see that on a large scale in the shape of the whole tree, but we see it on quite a small scale too, all the way down to the leaves on a tree. Most trees have two types of leaf, sun leaves and shade leaves. And what happens is, if a leaf is getting enough light, it remains a sun leaf. Sun leaves are smaller, lighter in colour and a bit thicker to the feel than shade leaves, which grow bigger, darker in colour and thinner. They're darker in colour because the tree is pumping more chlorophyll into the shade leaf, trying to make the most of the little amount of light there is there. Now we know that we get most of our light from the southern part of the sky, so we should expect to find more sun leaves on the south side of the tree and more shade leaves on the north side of the tree. This is the leaf I took from the south side of the tree. This is the leaf I took from the north side of the tree. The colour difference is not very dramatic in this case. That's sometimes the way it goes. But you can see how much this is being bent by the wind. This is much, much thinner. This one is much thicker to the touch. South side, north side. Sun leaf, shade leaf. The wind is leaving footprints on every single tree in a landscape, and one of the first places to look is the top. We look at the top of this hawthorn here, we'll notice that it's been bent over by the prevailing wind. So all we have to do is notice the trend, take into account where your prevailing winds come from, so from the southwest in the UK for example, then we face in the direction that it looks like those winds have come from, and we will be facing in that direction. So here in the UK, I'm facing in the direction that the winds have come from to create that effect. I will be facing very close to southwest. The thing to remember with this clue is that the more exposed a tree is, the bigger the clue. We're on top of a hill here, but it's not actually that exposed. There are lots of other trees nearby that are giving us a bit of shelter here. So the effect can be spotted here, but it's not that strong. If you're near the coast, near the west coast for example, you'll get very, very dramatic effects. You'll see trees that have been bent right over. If you're in the middle of a city, it takes a bit of practice, a little bit of expertise, but if you look at the very tops of city park trees, you can still spot this effect in the very highest twigs. We can use tree roots to help us find our way once we understand the relationship between wind and roots. If we think of a tree as having three main sections, there's the canopy, the leafy tree bit, then we've got the trunk, then we've got the roots. Most people think the roots are entirely underground, but actually in the lowest part of most tree species, the trunk and the roots meld together. They become one just above the ground. And this is really helpful for us because the roots have several jobs. They're taking water and minerals up the trunk, of course, but they are also steadying the tree against the wind. If we know where most of our winds come from, the roots grow biggest, strongest and longest on that side. So once we've identified the prevailing wind direction, we can make a compass out of many tree roots. The technique is to not use one tree, but study a few in the area. Ideally some trees that are exposed to the winds. And what you'll find is there are guy roots on the side that most of those winds come from. So here in the UK, we find the roots are biggest, strongest and longest on the southwest side of the tree. When we're in the heart of woodlands, what we find is that the sun and the wind find it a little bit harder to get in amongst the trees. So there are some other techniques that can be more reliable. I'm actually standing on one of them right now. This is a technique I call the mound and dip. Weak winds won't make their way into woodlands at all. It'll feel like a still day, even if there's a breeze outside the wood. So the only winds that make it into the wood are the very strong ones, particularly the storms. And what happens when a really powerful storm goes through a wood is all the weak trees come down, and they come down in a consistent direction. And this leaves marks on the landscape that can last 1,000 years. What I'm standing on here is a decayed root ball. So when the tree comes down in the storm, it rips the roots out of the ground, and this creates a trademark shape that we can recognise. Where the roots were, there's a mound of earth, and then where the roots have been pulled out of the ground, there's a gentle dip. All we need to do is notice these mounds and dips and look for the trend. In this part of the UK, the trend is from the southwest because most of the storms have come from that direction. But whenever I go to a new woodland in a new part of the world, I'm looking for these clues and there might be a new trend. So when you find the mound, stand on it, face the dip, and you'll be looking in a consistent direction. We've learnt how trees grow bigger on their southern side because of the light, and the branches on that side are closer to horizontal than the branches on the north side. We've also learned how the wind will comb the trees over from the direction the prevailing winds come from the southwest in the UK and many other places. A question I get asked lots and lots, and you might be thinking, is how do we tell the difference between those two effects? The marks being left by the sun and those by the wind. And it is a really important point. What we find is that the sun dictates the broadest shape, the big branches, and basically the shape of the tree as a whole, whereas the wind affects the extremities, in particular the top. So it is very common to see a tree that is much bigger on its south side, clear branch shape, the tick effect giving you direction. And then when you look at the top of that same tree, the very highest branches are being bent over by the wind in a different direction. So wind affects the most extreme parts of the tree, especially the tops. The sun is shaping the heart of the tree, the core, the main broad shape. You can use both effects on the same tree, and that's what I'd encourage you to do. Come up with a theory using either the sun or the wind of direction and see if the other effect supports it, and then you're really onto something. What we ideally want when we're trying to find direction from trees is an isolated deciduous tree, but sometimes that's not possible. What we've got behind me here is two trees, an ash tree and an oak tree, and they seem to be giving us mixed messages. The oak has branches that are growing out this way, and the ash has branches growing out that way. So what's going on? Well, the technique we use here, which I call the king of the jungle, is we've got to find the biggest, oldest tree in the environment nearest us. The oak is the older of the two trees. It has a bigger trunk, a fatter trunk, a bigger diameter. And what that means is the oak grew up exposed to all the elements, particularly the sunlight, and it grew more faithfully towards the light this way. The ash, which is younger, has a smaller trunk, grew up in the shade of the oak, which is why its branches are growing out in a different direction. So what we do is we ignore the younger trees, we focus on the bigger, older one, and that will give us a much truer picture of direction. This oak here, branches growing out this way, telling us confidently south is this way. I've just come through a patch of woodland and the trees have just changed dramatically. There are certain trees that can help us make a map, and the birch tree is a really good example of that. Birch trees produce millions of seeds, scatter them over a very wide area, but they only thrive in bare patches of ground, which means we find birch trees in clearings or at the edge of woodlands. These are colonising trees, and what we find is as you move through established woodland, there are certain tree species you find in the heart of woods. I've just passed a very nice oak there, that's a good example, but birch trees are a sign that you're getting into the open. So they're part of our map. If you're finding your way out of the woods and you come across some birch trees, it's a good sign. Trees can act as an altimeter. They can give us a general sense of our altitude. I've just been walking for a while, climbing steadily up a hill, and for the past quarter of an hour I was moving through beech trees, maples, oaks, a lot of broadleaf trees. Now I'm amongst conifers, and that's what I should expect if I'm gaining height. We find the broadleaf trees, the deciduous trees, low down, and then as we climb up the hill, what we find is they steadily become tougher species, the conifers. And within that change, you can often spot a height change within the trees. As you go up a hill, it's getting tougher for the trees, and the trees respond to this by growing shorter. So before you lose the deciduous trees as you climb the hill, you'll notice they get a bit shorter. And then you're seeing tall conifers. If you keep on climbing, the conifers get shorter, and eventually you emerge out the top at what's known as the tree line, when you're too high for any trees to survive.